In a world drowning in data, open source intelligence is the difference between noise and insight. I'm Jake Krebs, and this is the OSINT Podcast, unpacking the tools, tactics, and techniques that matter to the OSINT community. Whether you're tracking threats, analyzing platforms, or just trying to separate signal from noise, this is your go-to resource for all things open source intelligence. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome to the 20th episode of the OSINT Podcast. It's hard to believe we already have 20 episodes in the archive, but this episode of the podcast is going to be covering issues number 109 and 110 of the OSINT Newsletter. If you aren't following along to the OSINT Newsletter, we use this podcast to discuss topics that are mentioned in the newsletter. Every other week, we are doing a free issue of the OSINT Newsletter where we go over pretty much beginner content for new investigators on how to do certain methods, use certain tactics and techniques, use certain tools. And then every other issue beyond that, so every 2 weeks, we do a paid issue, which is sort of an aggregation of OSINT news as well as OSINT tools that you can use within your investigations. And then we have a premium section that goes over more advanced content that you can use as an either intermediate or advanced practitioner. You can also use it as a beginner practitioner too if you're very ambitious, but there are a lot of prerequisites that you would likely need to know about before you dig into that content. But before we dive in, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. First and foremost, head on over to osintnewsletter.com and subscribe if you aren't already. Check us out on social media. You can see us at x.com/OSINT Newsletter, also x.com/OSINT Podcast. You can also check us out on LinkedIn. Those are the two main areas that we are posting about our content. The reason why you want to follow on there and not just listen to the podcast is I talk a lot about different tools, different methods that you can use. We provide a lot of videos and additional supplemental content in those areas to be able to follow along more easily. And you can see something that I talk about and say, oh, that looks really interesting. I think that's for me. And you can check it out and follow a link instead of just typing in manually what I'm talking about here on the podcast. In addition to following us on social, you can head on over to two different sources that I want you to be aware of. The first one is going to be our CTFs that we run every single week. You can check those out at ctf.osintnewsletter.com. You can compete in the capture of the flag events and practice your OSINT skills ethically and see if you can complete some of the challenges that we have ready for you every single week. And in addition to that, if you are looking for new capabilities within the OSINT space, we do have a very advanced toolkit that we have available. You can find those at tools.osintnewsletter.com. It is a giant wiki of different tools that you can check out. Not only does it list the tools, it also gives you supplemental information like, is it paid? Is it free? Is it freemium? What does it do? How do you set it up? What are some of the prerequisites? So if you're looking to augment your capabilities or build a little bit of redundancy within your tool set, go ahead and check that out. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. Again, we're going to be covering issues 109 and 110 in the OSINT Newsletter. You can follow along for 109 and 110 just by going to osintnewsletter.com/109. And you can also check out osintnewsletter.com/110 to check out what I'm going to be talking about today. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. All right, issue number 109 is titled Why Boring is Better, OSINT on Public Records and Government Databases. So it is no secret, if you are in the OSINT space, that public records are a very, very solid source of open source intelligence, at least from the collection perspective. Also from a validation and verification perspective, they're very, very helpful. But the issue with public records and government databases is that they're very scattered, and there's not a single source where you can find all of them. There are some sources that aggregate a lot of them together. A lot of times they are paid and often very expensive, but if you're looking to get them for free or very inexpensively, it's very difficult for you to find public sources, especially when you look at things that are federal, state by state, international, especially in countries that are not very forgiving with their public records. It's very difficult to find these things and use them in your investigative process. In issue 109, we talk about things like property records, court records, business registrations, licensing data, etc. These are all very useful things that you can use for a variety of different use cases, whether it is person search, You're looking at information about a specific individual, whether it's just a normal private citizen or it's a public figure or it's a business owner, whatever it may be. It's also really helpful when it comes to looking into information about organizations, things like businesses, nonprofits, etc. There's a lot of information that is available. It is also helpful in many cases for looking at things about government information, like government contracts, different government operations, maybe government-sponsored or funded projects that are happening in cities. These are all really valuable things that can be helpful in your investigative process, depending on what your use case is. We go at a very high level and discuss these and what you can do for them. We pretty much talk about what the difference is. You have things like licensing databases, business registrations, etc. that may seem similar. It's kind of difficult to weed through a lot of this information, especially if you're a beginner. So we help you with terms, definitions, and figuring out what those things are. And then we talk about different tools that you can use to pull that information and begin the collection process. So things like government open data portals, right? They're kind of crappy sometimes. Sometimes they're like built on old PHP platforms and like they're really slow, and the information you get back is very difficult to decipher, but they're available and they're often very inexpensive, or they're free. So this is a great way for you to start, testing the waters with public sources and getting some databases in your toolkit. You can get all of the links saved in like a CSV. You can create a start.me page. You can create a variety of different things that you can use to inventory all of the open data portals that you get from government sources. Then we talk about the different tools that you can use for county and state record searches. These things are very, very difficult to keep track of. You could have some very, very large states or countries that have county by county or province by province, state by state records, and all of them are different. You would expect them to all have some sort of uniformity to their data structure. Maybe they would share a similar search engine or, tabular view or visibility of the platform, but that's not true. They're all different. You can use a lot of interesting tools to scrape that data and pull that data out once you find it. A lot of times you can download that data, directly from those sources, but we talk a little bit about those things and how you can inventory them so you can find this information later. Then we sort of go through a different, series of day-to-day investigations that you may run into with public searching. We step by step through one of the processes that you can do. So things like identifying jurisdiction, searching for information and cross-referencing those data points across different sources. We talk a little bit about that in this as well. Then we talk about things like ownership ties, figure out who owns a specific piece of property or a business or an item, for example. Business relationships, who is working with each other. Are there contracts between different businesses? Are there contracts between the government and specific businesses? It's a lot of times you can find suspicious activity when you look between the lines. You can find LLCs and a variety of other different incorporations that are like one people or one person that's associated with them, but they have millions of dollars of contract money coming in, for example. You can identify those types of connections and investigate whether or not they're legitimate. Another big thing too is legal history, looking at different things like disputes, criminal charges, civil cases, financial issues, things like that. Those are all things that are available when you do public searching. And so that's something, if it's interesting to you, if you're an investigative journalist, if you work in the government, if you work as a private investigator, for example, these are all data sources that you're going to often run into. And these are things you need to get familiar with, whether you're doing things specifically within one state, like a private investigator, for example, you're an investigator for a specific state. Maybe you have a region that you cover, or if you're an investigative journalist and you are investigating stuff across the nation, across the planet, and you're not necessarily just looking at the state of Arizona, for example, or the country of Germany, but you're looking at things that are happening all around the world. These are things that you definitely need to be familiar with. So if that sounds interesting to you, I recommend you go and check out issue number 109. Again, it is named Why Boring is Better, OSINT on Public Records and Government Databases. We also have a capture the flag that matches this particular issue. It's called Secret Meeting. So if you head on over to ctf.osintnewsletter.com, you can put some of these things to use and see if you're able to do an investigation that is related to this specific issue of the newsletter. So again, check it out. It's osintnewsletter.com/109. This brings us to issue number 110 of the OSINT newsletter. Again, this is an aggregation of OSINT news and tools in addition to some premium content, which the theme of this issue is using generative AI for sock puppet creation and identification. If you've been following my work for a while, you may recall many years ago, I wrote a detailed guide on how to create sock puppets using the information and the technology that was available at the time. Obviously, a lot has changed since then, so later on I will be talking about how the new technology that's available, primarily generative AI, can be helpful for both the creation of sock puppets as well as the identification of them for ethical purposes. So stay tuned later where I'll be talking about that. But first, on the notion of generative AI, I just wanted to do a quick disclaimer moving forward when it comes to the OSINT newsletter. It has become increasingly difficult to find news articles that are about open source intelligence that aren't completely AI generated. There are many tools that are out there that can help me identify if things are completely AI generated. I don't just rely on one of them when I make a determination if something is AI generated. Obviously, if one of the sources that I'm checking says it is 100% AI generated, I just move on, right? It's pretty obvious too. I can take a pretty good look at it and be like, yeah, I've seen enough AI content that this is pretty obviously that. But if something is like 60% AI generated, I'll run it through a few sources just to be sure. I used to be able to have, pretty good luck. I'd be able to find information about either OSINT or OPSEC or related content that was generated by actual human beings who were actually having original thoughts, were doing research, and were publishing the information that they were finding online, either through their blogs, through social media, etc. It's becoming much more difficult for that now. So you may see some of the same authors be published or mentioned in this publication very often. It's not because I am playing favorites, it's just because they're one of the few people that are still publishing content that is human generated, and it's valuable and it's insightful and it's new, right? It would be difficult for AI to generate this content because it's never been generated before. And it's pretty easy to tell those things. So as a result, you may see fewer OSINT news mentions in this publication moving forward. For example, in this issue, I only cover 2 topics instead of my typical 3. So just keep in mind moving forward, I'm going to try to shoot for 3. But if I can't make 3, it's primarily because I just can't find anything valuable. So if you are out there and you're generating really valuable content, make sure to hit me up and let me know. And if it's AI generated, I'll skip it. But if it's not, I'll definitely give it a read and I'll consider it for the publication. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump right in. The first one that I mentioned in this issue is OSINT Field Notes number 9, titled Nothing Was Really Hidden. This is again someone who is very frequently mentioned on this podcast and in this newsletter because they're putting out consistent good content. And that's Benjamin Strick. He writes OSINT Field Notes on Substack. It's a relatively new publication. He doesn't publish as often as we do, for example, but oftentimes his content is much more detailed and thorough because obviously it takes him a lot of time to write this stuff because it's a significant amount of content. I'm curious whether or not when he sends it out via email, if the whole thing can actually fit in the email. Now, I suspect it doesn't because I run into character limitations all the time. But with that in mind, what is OSINT Field Notes number 9 really about? One thing I like that he does is he breaks things down into consistent sections. So he has dispatches, for example, toolkit is another section, technical teardown is another section. And then sometimes you have, one-off sections, for example, but there's another one that he puts in this case that's called case file. And so we'll be covering these at a very high level. There's way too much for me to cover in this podcast if I wanted to dig into it deeply, but I will give some highlights based on things that I thought was really interesting and some things that I haven't really seen before. So the first thing that he covers in the dispatches section is a little bit of analysis on using Google Street View. It's very short, and it talks about things like locating Starlink terminals. And this is something that I haven't really thought about before. And it is what information can you gather from Starlink terminals? And so he does a write-up on that. And there's a lot of information about what your Wi-Fi name can actually give away about you and how you can investigate this information. So he has a couple images that do a little bit of, shedding some light on how many terminals we're looking at here. And in addition to that, he links to a YouTube video. It's called Change Your Wi-Fi Name. Talks a little bit about this more. And he also has something called OSINT at Home, a tutorial part 29. where you can be looking, you can get more information about what he's talking about here. So if this is something that's of interest to you, and it's definitely something that's interesting now that Starlink is available much more broadly across the globe, you probably want to check this out. And there's a variety of different links that you can, take a look at once you're there. Another thing that I really think is cool is Ben has a very hyper focus on geolocation. He always does really good work with geoanalysis, looking at images, doing imagery analysis, etc. Here's an interesting tool that I think might be valuable for some people, and it's a building height calculator. And why would that be relevant, right? Well, let's say that you're looking at an image and you notice in the horizon that some buildings are taller than others, right? It makes sense that they're not all the same height. But you want to figure out what building you're looking at. But it's difficult because maybe the visual recognition signs aren't crystal clear. So if you're like, well, I know it's the tallest building in the horizon, let me go and use this building height calculator. Based on what I'm seeing in satellite imagery, which building is the tallest in this particular area of interest, right? Like I kind of can get it down to a specific location, but now I need a little bit more metadata. And this will give you the metadata that you need to say, okay, this is the tallest building in this particular snapshot. I'm looking at this image. It has the highest building in the horizon. So I can do an additional analysis to determine if this is the building that I'm seeing. Instead of guessing or having to narrow it down, you get a little bit more metadata that makes this analysis a little bit easier to do. So this is something that I definitely think you should check out if you're doing a lot of geolocation, a lot of chronolocation or imagery analysis. It is a pretty easy tool to use and it's pretty straightforward. So go ahead and give that one a look. The next section that he talks about is it's a technical teardown using a YouTube metadata tool. I won't go into all of the details, but he does some look into some of the metadata tags, like whether or not information is being tagged for being available for children. This is something that is sort of like a trust and safety thing where information should be only tagged being suitable for children if it is suitable for children. And a lot of times you can usurp algorithms or get information in front of the eyes of people that should not be seeing it based on manipulating some of this metadata. And you as an investigator, you can use that information to be able to further your analysis. And so in this example, I think he pulls 60 or so videos, 69 videos from this channel, with 63 of them having the made for kids status. And a lot of this information is not suitable for children. And so this is something, if you're in the trust and safety space or you're investigating in general a specific YouTube channel, definitely give that one a look. The last one, I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but it is a case file. It's a teardown or a breakdown of how Bellingcat linked VRE to Repli through their infrastructure. And so if you want to do a case study, like sort of reverse engineering a successful investigation and figure out how you can improve your own processes, Ben does a good job at breaking this one down as well. So definitely go ahead and check this out. If you're not already subscribed to OSINT Field Notes, we do recommend it on this Substack, on the OSINT Newsletter, so you can find it there. But if you just go on Substack and you search for OSINT Field Notes, or just go to osintfieldnotes.substack.com, you can find it and subscribe. He's not putting out content super frequently like we are, other publications are, but it is very rich in detail. So definitely give that one a shot. The next news topic that I'm going to be covering is written by Bellingcat from the Bellingcat investigation team. It's titled Heading Off, New Technique Helps Track Grain Smuggling Expansion to Libya. Now, this is not my area of expertise, so I will not break this down, but what I will say is that this is one of the coolest articles that I've seen published by Bellingcat. It's fully interactive, so as you scroll, there's a timeline view. And it takes you through this whole journey of all the findings that they have throughout this investigation. So as you scroll, you'll see an interactive little widget thing that's going across a map in Libya. And as you begin to scroll down and read the article more, you see this story unfold, and you see the timeline of it go through. And this is something that's really cool. I think this is setting the standard for investigative journalism and having people easily follow along. It also steps through the individual data sources that they use, how they use them, so you can possibly integrate these things into your own workflow, as well as a variety of other visual aids. So if you are in investigative journalism, you are interested in things like visual identification, satellite imagery, and you are interested in things like geopolitics or economics, geopolitical or international economics, this is definitely an area or an article that you definitely need to study, because Like I said, this is really, really interesting. I need to dig into this a little bit further, but when I saw it, I saw some of the guides, I saw the high quality of it, the GIFs that they put in here that show the different maritime activity at ports over time using satellite imagery, as well as the data visualization that they use. It was definitely something worth calling out in this issue. Check that out. Again, that's the end of the OSINT news section. In this podcast, we're only going to be covering 2. There's also only 2 that are in the newsletter this issue. Hopefully, we get a good turnaround and we see some non-AI generated content. But that takes us over to the tools section. There are 3 that I'm going to be covering. So the tools section still has 3. And these are all really username centric. One of them is a little bit more robust, but 2 of them are very username centric. So the first one on the list is threat actor username search. And this isn't just another username search tool like you can find with Sherlock or a variety of others. It is actually a Boolean type of search engine. And what that means is that you can look up a search or a username. Instead of it giving you a bunch of search results about that username, it will tell you, true or false, it is associated with the threat actor. That's really awesome because it makes a very clear determination for you. If you have a whole spreadsheet or a whole database of usernames and you want to run them through a tool that determines which one of these are nefarious, malicious, etc., and which ones aren't, this is the tool for you. And what I love the most is that they have an API that's also publicly available. So you can very easily use Claude or use your own programming skills to build a tool that will iterate through various different usernames and determine which ones are related or associated to a threat actor and which ones aren't. The user interface is very easy to use, and I generally just like this idea of making something very simple. You could do something similar with cryptocurrency or meme coins or scam or fraud or anything like that. You could build something very similar and it would be just as useful. This one has more of a CTI related focus. So if that's your bread and butter, definitely make sure to check this tool out. The next tool on the list is Venmo OSINT tool. And this is through a series of tools that Dennis Keefe seems to be publishing lately. He also has a Discord one that I'll likely cover in the next podcast and newsletter. But this one is a very robust Venmo OSINT tool that uses the available data points that you can get from Venmo right now. So whether that is looking for a specific profile underneath the username, searching for users by first and last name or keyword username, etc. And then it also allows you to put in your specific cookies or authentication so that it's not something you have to rely specifically on for like general use. So it's not an enterprise application. They're not rotating through different cookies and authentication. They expect you to bring your own authentication, essentially. It shows you kind of how to do that a little bit, gives you a little step-by-step guide. But then if you want to start looking for specific users or doing profile lookups, this tool is very, very, very easy to use. Dennis, if you're listening to this, I do like your Discord option as well. I think that you should create a link somewhere within these tools or the demos that you do provide so that people can very easily pivot through your suite of tools that you're building. But thanks again for building this. Definitely check it out. It's the second one on the list. You can find the tool on GitHub, but there's also a link to a demo of the tool of the web app that's hosted by Vercel if you wanted to check it out for yourself without having to install the tool from GitHub. The last one on the list is called User Scanner. It's a 2-in-1 OSINT tool. This one is very similar to Sherlock, for example, but it's much more robust in my opinion. It's hosted on GitHub. It does a lot of very advanced things. Not only does it do username, it also does email checks. It can extract usernames from emails, do a variety of things like that. But it does a lot more, like it does advanced proxy rotation, for example. It has multi-formatted exports, so if you want to do JSON or CSV or whatever you want to do. And the best part about it is that this is a very, very solid framework to get started. And because we have tools like Claude Code or VS Code or whatever, maybe if you want to use Copilot, you can easily expand and create new modules for this as well. But if you're looking for a username tool, if you think Sherlock is kind of okay but has a lot of false positives, definitely give this one a check. It is found on GitHub. It's free to use. It's called User Scanner. You just go to github.com. And I have the username of the developer on the newsletter, but you can also just go to their username and check out User TAC Scanner. It's definitely probably the most powerful and feature-rich username and email scanner I've seen on GitHub. And it did get number 7 repository of the day for the GitHub trending list. So it's definitely something that's not just relevant for investigators that are very into niche investigations, but it's also something that many people are using. It has over 2,200 stars on GitHub. So definitely go ahead and check that one out. But that's it for the tools section. Like I said, it's very username centric, whether you're looking for threat actor usernames, you're looking for usernames on Venmo, or you're just looking for more advanced username email searching tools. This is an issue that's pretty much all encompassing of those things. So definitely check out the OSINT tools section. And again, if you're following along on the newsletter, it's osintnewsletter.com/110. And that brings us to the premium section of the newsletter titled Using Generative AI for Sock Puppet Creation and Identification. Again, I start this with a disclaimer. Do not use sock puppets or any type of synthetic personas for doing suspicious or weird things like catfishing people, impersonating another individual, or doing anything that results in harm or potential harm, either physically or digitally, on another person. Let's use this for educational purposes and for official authorized investigative purposes, whether you're in the government, in the private sector, whatever. If you have authorization from people who have, skin in the game when it comes to the negative side effects of an investigation, follow those boundaries to the T to make sure that you're maintaining ethical use cases for some of these things that may appear to be very gray area, depending on which pair of glasses you're wearing on a particular day. But let's go ahead and jump into it. In the newsletter, I do provide a link to the old guide that I wrote. It's going to be on the Wayback Machine because my blog is no longer up and running on jkrebs.com. But I did create a detailed guide, kind of showing you all the prerequisites of what you need to get a sock puppet running and some tips and tricks on how to create a good one and different paths that you can take depending on what your use cases are. But I start there. And before I dive in, make sure to check us out. It's on 110. It's going to be behind the paywall. There are a couple prerequisites that you probably want to check out on the old version. It's hard for me to say the link here because it is a Wayback Machine link, but you want to check that one out first before you dig in and listen to the rest of this episode because a lot of that context is discussed in that article. I will be giving a high-level summary of what those elements are, but for now, go ahead and check that out before we get started. Okay, so high-level overview of the elements of a sock puppet. So I'm just going to run through this list. You can go back to the newsletter and read it yourself. You can also refer to the article that I have linked in this newsletter for the original version. But first and foremost, you want a dedicated device, either a physical device or a virtual device. This counts for both your investigative machine or workstation, whether that's a laptop or a desktop, as well as a mobile phone. I prefer to have a physical device just to create a physical separation between your investigative material and your devices and your personal ones, just to avoid any oversights between the overlap of the two of them. You also want to make sure you have a matching IP address to the persona you're trying to create. So if you are trying to create a Russian persona, for example, you want an IP address that's associated with a Russian speaking language country. The next thing on the list that you want to make sure you have is a dedicated email address or phone number, preferably both. If you're an Apple user, you can use email relays through iCloud, like Hide My Email. This is very good for account registration as it does obfuscate the email address in the event that the list gets leaked and you do not want your identity associated back to your profile. However, you might run into situations where you need to share your email with somebody from your persona, and handing them a relay email is definitely going to be suspicious. So definitely adjust accordingly depending on what your goals are. The next thing on the list is going to be making sure you have a group of social media platforms or profiles on those platforms that the sock puppet is active on. You don't have to necessarily have every single profile for every single platform that exists. This is a common misconception. Some of these are more difficult to create on than others, and so you want to make sure it's only adjusted to what your actual intelligence goals are. If you're trying to create a hacker persona, for example, you might not necessarily need a Facebook account. It's very difficult to make a Facebook sock puppet, for example, so skipping that step isn't necessarily meaning that your sock puppet is weaker. Lastly, but certainly not least, we want to make sure that we produce credibility for the sock puppet. So you should have something like a website associated with the handle. Maybe you have blog posts that are created that mention that person or handle. You want to make sure if you're choosing path one, I'll talk about the two different paths in a second, that you are creating quality images for that individual to make them look like a real person and not an AI generated monster or something like that. But if you do choose path two, which I'll talk about again in a second, it's not necessarily super important. And then the last thing is you want to make sure that you create some sort of of small network for that persona so that it doesn't seem like they know nobody. Nothing is more suspicious than a LinkedIn profile with 0 connections, for example. Whether that network is synthetic among multiple sock puppets or it's actually realistic and you put in the work to actually make connections with people, this is going to be something that's really important. So that's the high-level overview. Like I said, I go into a little bit more detail in the newsletter about the specific nuances of those different paths or those different elements that are requirements. But the 2 different paths that I mentioned, path number 1 is essentially you're trying to create a human photorealistic looking version of a sock puppet. This is something that would be much more useful if you're doing investigations that require tricking a person or deceiving a person or misinforming a person in some sort of authorized ethical way. That's kind of a gray area, that you are a real person and make them seem that it's a real person so they are going to be able to share information with you or do some type of social engineering that will allow you to get information about an individual, business, or any type of operation. This is the sketchiest path you could probably take when it comes to creating a sock puppet because you are impersonating another individual, you are deceiving, you're creating misinformation. However, there are certain use cases where this may be required. I'm thinking government use cases, law enforcement use cases, a variety of other official use cases where you may need to actually do this to achieve the mission. And so case by case, make sure that it is well thought through and well approved before you go down path 1. I prefer path 2. Path 2 is when you create a sock puppet that is obviously not a real person, but it is a persona that is actually associated with some sort of credibility. So the example that I link in this newsletter is a handle called Bushido Token. It's a cyber threat intelligence or security researcher that is very active online, publishes a lot of quality content. Obviously, we know this person's name is not Bushido Token. They use an avatar or some type of cartoon looking figure for their profile image, but the credibility is there nonetheless because the work has been put in to actually show there is a person behind that persona. We just don't necessarily know who that person is unless we do a significant amount of digging. This is one path that I prefer to take when it comes to creating sock puppets so that you can actually operate a little bit more freely online, not be super worried about your OPSEC all the time, like accidentally creating an image that looks fake or something like that, but you can actually make connections with people. As a matter of fact, there's a significant number of people that I know online or individuals that I know online that I actually don't even know who they are. I just know them through their handle, and we've collaborated on research projects in the past, and this is something that's super above board and normal. And if you're looking to actually create something more ethical that you can use a lot more flexibly, you may want to consider path 2. The problem with path 2 is it requires you putting in a lot more work. You can't just create the account and assume everyone thinks you're legit. You can easily trick somebody into thinking that you're real with path number 1 just by creating really high quality images or, creating a bunch of like random content over time to make it seem like a normal profile. But path 2 is a little bit more ethical, will require you to put in a little bit more work and actually engage with the community that you're trying to get a foothold into a little bit more easily. So that's sort of the high level overview of the elements of a sock puppet. What I go on to describe now that you understand the fundamentals and the prerequisites of sock puppet creation is how that sort of changes in the world of modern generative AI. So the first thing that I talk about in this issue is creating images with the most advanced image generation options that you have available. So obviously, in my opinion, the most impressive ones when it comes to actually creating photorealistic images of individuals is probably going to be Gemini. I think they call it Nano Banana. Maybe it's Nano Banana 3 or 2 now, but it is very good. You can take an image, a stock photo. I prefer to use stock photos of people because these are images that people are putting up where they want you to be able to use it for different types of use cases, especially if it's royalty-free stock images. And then you can take those and you can use them as a base to create a new image that looks similar to an individual you see in a stock image, but is slightly modified and altered to look like somebody else. And the good part about using this method is that you can create multiple different images of this individual by having a bunch of seed images from the same person of a stock image. So let's say you have some sort of model that's on there or just like a normal person. Like when I say a model, I don't mean like a supermodel. I mean like just a person who's taking a portrait of themselves and putting it up as a royalty-free image. But let's say there's multiple images of that individual. You can use those as seeds for the AI to create a different looking image that looks similar to the person but is slightly different. And you can have them in a variety of different environments. And then based on all of those seed images, you can create a variety of images that makes it very similar looking. And because these models are very, very important, or not important, they're very, very intelligent, they're very good at what they do, they can create very, very photorealistic images that take a very trained eye to know that they're not real. I mentioned Gemini is a really good one. Grok surprisingly makes really good images. I found that the images that are created by OpenAI or ChatGPT are a little bit too smooth when it comes to the skin texture. And I didn't really have much luck with any other LLMs to create anything that didn't just look like a cartoon. So I would prefer to use Gemini or Grok. I think I had the best results with Grok, actually. Gemini has this weird thing where the image quality will degrade over time the more edits you ask it to do. Grok doesn't seem to do that. They just cap out your image generation after a while. So this is something that I would explore and tread carefully on. Make sure, again, that this is authorized use. But you can create a suite of images, associate them to a profile, and have an actual legitimate full-looking profile. Whereas before, the original article that I wrote relied on you using a bunch of really busted methods, like taking two images, doing a face swap, and then using Photoshop or other methods to sort of smooth it over to make it sure that it looks good. So essentially, you would take a stock photo of a person and you would swap a real-looking person onto their face so that it would be able to spoof things like PIM eyes or whatever. But it was much easier to detect. And this method is a little bit more difficult to detect. For example, what I talk about in this article is that you can run your images through PIM eyes and other facial recognition tools to see if there are matches. If you don't edit the image enough and you just do very minor edits to the individual from a stock image, you will still get results that come back for those stock images. So that's sort of your litmus test to see how much you've altered the images, whether or not you get a positive result on tools like PIM eyes, which are free for the first 10 searches that you do. The last thing that I'll mention is creating language profiles. This is something that was always very interesting to me, and this was something that that was always very difficult to do programmatically. So what I mean by creating language profiles is, let's say that you have an individual who talks in a certain way. In this example that I use in the article is very choppy sentences. They'll say maybe 2 or 3 words per sentence normally, and that's their writing style. That's how they always write. And if you want to create a legitimate looking profile for an individual, you have to keep the linguistic consistency steady, right? You can't have like a variety of different language, or you don't want to make it type and look similar to what you would type, because if someone knows how you type, if you have certain quirks, use certain pieces of language that are regionally specific, for example, people will be able to identify like, yeah, that person's not actually from there because they're saying things like, you might say y'all instead of you all, for example. That might tell you that, like, I know you're probably not from Canada if you say y'all, for example, right? If you want consistency, you want to be able to create profiles, and AI allows you to do that very easily. So I actually used Claude to create a skill that would transform everything that I type into a consistent language profile, so that if I needed to post content online, it would always look the same as if it was coming from this same person that I created. So you have this image, and then you have it associated to a certain type of language pattern. And every time I would need to respond to someone or post something, I could translate it into this language pattern, which then would allow me to seem consistent to the person who is looking. So if someone's suspicious, they're looking for something that's interesting or weird, they would then say, okay, this person always types the same. I know that this is the person I'm talking to. This is something you can do with AI. And this is a net new addition that I have from the original piece that I wrote a few years ago, because we did not really have the ability to do that at scale. I tried to do it programmatically, replacing words, creating templates and stuff like that. It just wasn't that good. It wasn't that robust. But these new AI skills allow you to do it very easily. So I definitely recommend you check that out. I give several examples of before and afters, so you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say language profiles. The last tidbit that I forgot to mention is you want to make sure you make realistic contributions online. Don't just post a bunch of AI-generated content online. We've all seen AI-generated content at this point. It's very easy to identify. You need to make real contributions. If you're trying to create a hacker persona, again, maybe you should publish some security research tools on GitHub, and they should actually be good. They shouldn't be garbage. They should actually be good. So you put in a little bit of the work, you create these new tools, and then you create a couple blog posts, a little how-to wiki guides, whatever for them, whatever. You engage, you maybe commit some code to some other projects, for example. Now you actually look like a real person doing real things instead of somebody who's just spamming a bunch of X posts that were clearly generated by AI. So definitely something to consider. And that's pretty much it. There's a lot more details within the post itself. I think this is a really cool issue. The sock puppet issues that I usually write about are really popular. They're really, they're referenced a lot in different blog posts because not a lot of people write about them. So if that's something of interest to you, definitely give it a read. It's a shorter read. I think this one's about 2,000 words overall, including the free section, the news and tools. So if there's something of interest to you, make sure to subscribe. Upgrading is free. It's not free. It's easy. It's free to subscribe, but upgrading is just a small amount of money. It's $8 a month, $80 a year. $8 a month, I think now is literally the cost of a Starbucks, like venti coffee. So not too much that, and you get access to the entire archive. At this point, this is issue number 110. So 110 posts, even more, I actually think. I think I didn't start with the numeric versions of them immediately. So over 110 posts that you can go back and check out as part of your development as an OSINT researcher, just for $8 a month. So I definitely give that a look. And that's pretty much it for this episode. Again, quick housekeeping on the way out. ctf.osintnewsletter.com. Compete in our CTFs. We do them every single week. We give you challenges and you can improve your skills. Tools.osintnewsletter.com is our list of tools that we mentioned in this podcast, as well as tools that we are mentioning all around the internet, on social media, etc. And then lastly, social media. Check us out on X, on LinkedIn, videos that go along with some of the things I'm talking about, some of the things I'm writing about. If you're interested in those things, you can definitely see them visually a lot better on social media. But that's all I got. Thanks for listening. I will see you all again next time.